All right, let's start off with the tariffs. The president saying yesterday those tariffs will happen. In your mind, do you think that's definitely going to happen? Before we had you on before, you said a lot of things that the president's saying is a combination of trolling, a negotiation tactic, and, some serious policy. Where does this fall?
Well, Frank, I did say that, but at the same time, I think that one of the biggest, conundrums, I think the market believes that sort of like the first administration, Trump is throwing this out largely for negotiation, like he did a few weeks ago on Canada and Mexico to get more concessions on border security. But I fundamentally disagree with that. I believe the president is committed to a very protectionist trade policy throughout the course of this administration. He has surrounded himself with economic advisors who advance very strong tariff policy, as well as national security advisors who no longer have I think a dissent like they did in the first administration that believed trade was good for our national security relationships. And so I think the president is committed to this. I can't sit here and tell you exactly when it's going to be, if it's next week, but I think some indications from the administration have been it would basically take until roughly the 1st of April to complete their investigations to prove unfair trade practices. And so I think that, again, markets, I think, often discounted thinking this is more bluster for him to get something negotiated. I think the reality is this is where this administration is going to go. Unlike the first Trump administration, this one is far more committed to a protectionist trade policy.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the market seems to continue to react to these tariffs. Not sure if the market's quite priced in this protectionist policy. Coming up later today, we have the House voting on its budget plan at 6 p.m. Also, we have those, what a lot of people call the Trump tax cuts. They're going to be coming up in a couple months. I just want to see, how do you see the state of play when it comes to both of those?
Well, I don't see the tax cuts coming up in a couple months. I think that, Frank, this is going to take all year to work out. I think ultimately the threat of trillions of dollars in tax increases at the end of the year will force some sort of concession, but it's going to be a long, tough year, and I think it's going to be tough sledding ahead today. The reality is that Speaker Johnson cannot afford to lose only 2 House Republicans. People forget that when we passed tax reform in 2017, we actually had 12 House Republicans defect against the bill. And so his challenge is really, really difficult. And as the budget's been proposed, there's a couple of House members who say the cuts are too severe, and there's a few House members who say there are not enough cuts. And that's going to be really hard for him to reconcile. And so I think that the vote today, he may see it postponed. I think it's going to be a very tough sled for him. But I've advocated for the House plan because the Senate looks to divide this and do an energy and border bill first and taxes at the end of the year. If you pull off the energy and border, it's going to be a lot harder for Mike Johnson to get a bill passed at the end of the year because he needs those provisions to keep his conference together. And if you separate them, it's going to make it a lot harder for him to just get tax reform passed at the end of the year.
All right, so a lot at stake when it comes to the House for the rest of this year. Last question, and you're a straight talker. I want to get a straight answer out of you, Mark. What do you make of this whole Doge thing? Elon Musk being an advisor to the White House, having this power to send emails to people saying, explain your job or risk being fired, and some of the pushback by Trump appointees to having their staff members actually do that.
Well, big picture, Frank, it's important to remember we're at $36 trillion in debt. We continue to talk about the need to cut spending, and we actually never do. And so I think for conservatives, this is actually the first time you've seen cuts to government agencies, which I think is incredibly welcomed. At the same time, here are the challenges. If the executive branch can do this on their own, then what happens when another Democrat administration comes in and says, you know what, I decide I don't want ICE to show up to work. I don't want Customs Border Patrol to show up to work. I'm just going to tell them I'm cutting them. If it's not something that's done legislatively, I think it makes it far more temporary. And second, Frank, nobody's talking about this, but the government funding shutdown comes on March 14th. Republicans typically and always need Democrat votes to pass that bill. Democrats are going to demand that all this funding get put back in place. How's the Trump administration going to do that in only 3 weeks when Democrats say, look, you need my support to keep government open? I'm requiring this funding be reinstalled. Is President Trump going to sign that bill, or is he going to refuse to? And so I think we have a big challenge coming up in only just a couple weeks that may see all this funding actually restored.